I'm Chip Templeton here at the Mitchell Memorial Library on the campus of Mississippi State University. This weekend we're experiencing the 16th annual Charles Templeton Ragtime and Jazz Festival, which is going to get kind of a mouthful here, but it's part of the Charles Templeton Music Museum, which is on the 4th floor here in the library. And you can take tours of that throughout the week if you're ever in Starkville and want to come by for a visit. We started our festival last evening with what we call the Gatsby Gala. And then today and tomorrow we have all sorts of activities throughout the day and the evening. And we have very great lineup of performers that have come to make our experience here be educational and entertaining. And I have as my guest right now Mr. Josh Duffee from Davenport, Iowa.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Sorry for the long introduction, but I wanted to kind of set the table for our conversation.
That's perfect how to do that, yeah.
So, and we just met earlier this morning.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
I know you had a long travel to get here, and we really appreciate the extra effort to get here.
Oh, pleasure. I love coming down to the South, and of course my family, having a 15-year-old, we had to hit Whataburger because he's a bottomless pit, so that filled him up there. But we have family down in Bay Minette, Alabama, and that's actually where my family originated many years ago.
Okay,
and so
that is interesting.
A chance for us to visit my dad's aunt in her early 90s, and so and then my family to see where my side of the family started.
Well, that is very important to do.
It is.
So, but anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself musically. Where did you get started with the music bug in your life?
It all started back in the Quad Cities, is what we call it. I live in Davenport, Iowa, right on the Mississippi River, and it's borders Moline, Illinois. So we're right there, and so I was going back and forth over the Mississippi for music events, but I attended Moline High School. And that is the same high school where the great Louis Bellson attended school, and he was the drummer for Duke Ellington and was married to the vocalist Pearl Bailey. And so a lot of history there. But what's great is in Davenport, this is where Bix Beiderbecke came from. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we have Bix in the 20s and very early 30s, and then Louis Bellson picked up with the Benny Goodman Band in the early 40s. And I'm thinking, we have a rich music culture here. So I graduated Moline High School in 1998, and in that time I'd met Louis Bellson, and he got me interested in a lot of the early drummers. And I was listening to Baby Dodd, Zutty Singleton, Chick Webb. I mean, the names could go on and on.
Chick Webb, that's an interesting guy.
Yeah, oh my gosh. And so Louis' like, how is someone your age, and I was 16 at the time, interested in these musicians? And I said, well, my grandparents loved to listen to music. We had ballrooms, still do, in our area where people could go and hear the big bands and dance to the music. And that's something that you don't see a lot of anymore. The ballrooms have been closing down, but we still have the Call Ballroom, which operates with dances at home. And so I was listening to this music, and I'm like, I love this early jazz music. This is great. And after I graduated, I went to a community college and got a 2-year degree from there. And I thought, well, should I go to the 4-year university, or should I just try to start performing? And I took the second route, thinking, let's see what happens. And
well, you never know where it's going to go.
Exactly. It's been going 20 years now professionally. And so I've been performing. I perform in 10 different groups up in the Quad City area, and I tour around, and I've been to Australia and England, and had the fortunate opportunity to perform at Jazz at Lincoln Center in Dizzy's with the Hot Jazz Alliance when I was on tour once.
Wow.
And so it's been really neat to live your dream, and that's something when I go around and I talk to students, I'm like, what do you want to do in life? And they're like, well, if any of them say I want to be a musician, I'm like, don't let people tell you no. You do what you need to do to follow your dream, because so many people said no to me doing this. You're not making a living doing 20s music. And I'm like, this is my passion. This is what I love. And I loved collecting 78 RPM records. I loved collecting sheet music. And so I was going into flea markets, picking all this up when I was in my early 20s. And the people would look at me and they're like, you're a little young for this, aren't you? I'm like, oh no. I said, this is some hot music. I said, if you give it a listen and check it out. Well, some of those owners were doing that and like, hey, this music's great. And that's what's exciting, is that you never know who has never heard this music before, because it's from the teens and 20s and 30s, but it's coming on fresh ears that want to hear something new today. And in the age of being digital, they can hear all this music at the click of a mouse. And so that's been my career for 20 years, has been performing and educating. And I teach private music lessons to students in the middle school and high schools in the area. So I've been trying to give back the gift of music to those students. And I've never wanted to be rich and famous. I want to be happy and do what I love in life. And that's what I've set out to do. And people have said, well, you could go play here and do that. I'm like, no, I feel like I'm making a difference in my community with the musicians, and I'm keeping Bix's legacy going. I'm keeping Louis Bellson's legacy going by giving tours and seminars about them in their hometown area. And that's what's really important. And being family, that's what makes these festivals so important. And the collection of your family here is just impressive, with all the talking machines and the sheet music. For the first time seeing it, I mean, I was
I'm glad you
jaw-dropped.
got to see that earlier before we came in for the interview.
Yeah,
here.
it's so impressive. So if people are down here at the university, they really need to take that in, because this is American history right here.
This is our music.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Europe had the opuses and all these fancy classical names, and we've got, you know, pickles and peppers and the octopus rag and these crazy names. It's our stuff, and we can name it whatever we want to name it.
Exactly, and it's everything from the music, but as you mentioned with the gala that you had with the attire, just beautiful what people were dressing like during the 1920s. But then I like to go to the Art Deco area, the art that they were creating, and then you look at the art of the sheet music, hand-drawn, and what they were coming up with for the design. Some people would just buy it for the cover. They didn't care what song it was. They're like, such a beautiful cover.
Right, yeah. I enjoy picking the covers out that are displayed every time we have it. And I'm just amazed when I have some self-time when I'm going through the sheets, and you're just at awe.
Oh, yes.
All the way from the rich colors that is 100-something years old.
Right.
To why did they do this? I mean, it's the business of music is what the collection is called. So you view it from more than the music, it's about the industries,
right,
society, fashion like we saw last night, any number of things. So let's go back to Bix.
Yeah.
Because, you know, being from Mississippi, you know, we kind of lean towards New Orleans.
Right.
And we think of Satchmo, Louis Armstrong. I know about Bix, I know how great he is, but I don't get enough of Bix. So since you do know all about that, and kind of give our audience a few minutes education of what they need to know about him and what he meant to the American music and where he brought it forward to. Would you do that?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
With Bix's history, you have to imagine he did everything musically in his life in 28 years. He was born March 10th, 1903.
And this is B-I-X.
B-I-X,
Just
correct.
to make sure people know how to spell this.
His full name was Leon Bismarck Beiderbecke, but he got the nickname of Bix. But people know him as Bix. And with being born in 1903, he passed away in 1931 on August 6th. So you have to imagine, wow, 28 years old. That's such a young life when we look at lives today.
He's the Buddy Holly of his era.
He was, yeah. And he was somebody that would sit at the piano and just had a God-given talent that he could just play anything. And he had this photographic memory. If he saw something, he could play it right away. And the story went when his mother got him into piano lessons. He did his first lesson. The teacher sent him home, came back the next week, did the lesson again. The teacher called his mother Agatha and said, I can't teach Leon anymore. She's like, well, did you do something wrong? And he's like, well, he sure did, because he played the lesson exactly like last week. She's like, I still don't follow. What? He played it exactly how I played it, with mistakes and everything. Because the teacher had made the mistakes, and Bix was just watching him play using his ear, and that's how he learned. So he actually played it with the mistakes of the teacher as well.
I had never heard this story.
So yeah, and I learned a lot of this from Rich Johnson, who was a local Bix historian. He's now passed on. And I also heard stories from Les Swanson, who was a friend of Bix that I got to interview when I was in my teens and 20s. So that's another thing about being from my area. I got to meet people who knew Bix and Louis. But with Bix's career, he was playing Carnegie Hall with Paul Whiteman in the late 20s. He was recording under his own name, Bix Beiderbecke and his gang. He played with the Gene Goldkett Orchestra, one of the musicians I personally love from Detroit, and had one of the top bands in 1926 and 27. But he was vital because people were hearing him, like Hoagy Carmichael, and were just, when he was at Indiana University, and was just floored. Like, here come the Wolverines, he hears Bix, and he goes, I passed out as soon as I heard him playing. And he goes, and then when I came to again, Bix was still playing, and I passed out again. And Hoagy loved Bix so much that he named his son Hoagy Bix Carmichael.
Very
so
interesting.
there's so much inspiration that Bix had for other musicians. And you mentioned New Orleans. He was inspired by the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, who were playing in Chicago when Bix's parents sent him to Lake Forest Academy because he wasn't doing well at Davenport Central. So his family's like, we need to get you going for the school. So they sent him to Chicago, to Lake Forest. Well, that was the worst thing they could do because Chicago was a hotbed of jazz. That's what Bix was into.
Okay, so it all kind of worked out well for him, and our music is better for him.
Oh, yes.
And his experience.
Oh, yes,
so.
very much.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit about this weekend and maybe the instruments you're going to play. I mean, I know we have the traditional piano that several of our performers are going to use.
Yes.
And we've talked about flute, and we've got others in banjo and guitar. So what are you going to share with us this weekend?
I bring the percussion aspect to the group. And normally with ragtime events, that's one thing you don't hear about much because you know about pianos. But the percussionists played a vital part in some of the early recordings, and it's a very abbreviated trap kit that we call it. So it's a big 28-inch bass drum, and then I have what's called traps, and those are all the little instruments that can mount to the hoop of the drum, which would be woodblocks, cowbells, triangle if we needed something like that. But then they'd also have a tambourine off the side. But there's no hi-hat, there's no ride cymbals.
There's no rock and roll.
Oh, there's no
stuff.
Neil Peart from Rush.
This
is like really
okay.
abbreviated here.
Right.
And so I'm also going to be playing the xylophone because that was very big during the acoustic days because it projected onto the recordings. And so I'll be emulating the sounds of Teddy Brown, who I feel the greatest xylophonist of all time. There's the Green Brothers that had their recordings for the Victor label, but Teddy Brown was a 400-pound xylophonist who was from England, originally from the States and moved to England.
I did not know that.
And there's clips of him on YouTube, and when my students see him, it's incredible how this big guy can actually play so limber on this xylophone. And so I'll be doing a couple of his songs on xylophone with the Sweet and Hot Quartet that we're going to be performing with. But it's a chance for people to come and hear what an actual 1920s drum set and drummer would have sounded like. You don't get that opportunity often, and it is an art to play it. You're just not pounding. You have to be thinking musically as a percussionist.
It is certainly a very important part of the experience.
Yeah.
It's a lot more going on than you might at first think.
Exactly. And what's neat is that my bass drum actually has the original painting from the 20s on it, and it's a landscape scene, and I call it the Bob Ross landscape scene with happy little trees, and it lights up. So people will be sitting in the audience and can see this beautiful bass drum with this antique drum set.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Josh, thanks for speaking with us this morning and
Pleasure.
telling
Yes,
us a
thank
little
you.
bit more about yourself and about your music. And we're just very appreciative that you are here in Starkville and at Mississippi State, and just welcome.
Thank you so much. It's
Okay.
an honor to be here.
Thank you for tuning in, and we again invite you to come to the Charles Templeton Music Museum here at the Mitchell Memorial Library at Mississippi State University. And thank you so much.